so the first business model type this guy described was the solution shop. And the solution shop is basically any business model type where you're trying to assemble a bunch of smart people in a room, give them all the resources they might need to solve unstructured problems. And this is really where general hospitals got their start. You know, you want to house these people together so that they can solve some of these complex problems. And you know, this type of business model actually typifies things like consulting firms and high-end law firms and marketing firms, research organizations, basically where you got to bring in talent. And really, it's the diagnostic and intuitive work of general hospitals that arose out of this idea. And interestingly, every one of these business models is most effectively paid on a fee-for-service basis. And really, that's where the fee-for-service system arose in healthcare. It was because this is how general hospitals got their start. Now, there is a second type of business model, as I said, that gets enveloped under this general hospital business model. And what we're not realizing is that it really deserves an entirely different business model to manage. And this was something called a value-adding process business. And this is basically any business model where your job is to take in something that's broken or unfinished, do stuff to it, and you ship it out in a higher value form. And so things like manufacturing, where we bring in raw steel and we do stuff to it and we ship cars out, or in food services, where we bring in raw ingredients and we do stuff to it and we ship meals out. Really, it's the medical procedures that we're doing in hospitals that follow a diagnosis that actually fall under this category. And the reason why it's important to understand this is because, again, not only does it deserve a different business model, it gets paid on a very different basis. So all the businesses that fall into this category can be paid on a fee-for-outcome basis. In fact, paying them on a fee-for-service basis makes no sense. It creates distorted incentives. When you pay things on a fee-for-outcome basis for things like procedures in a hospital, you can start to offer things like money-back warranties, or in the case of hospital care, it would be capitation for the benefit of the providers, where they can actually do things to keep you out of the hospital or to keep you healthy, and to do it right the first time. Now, when it comes to facilitated networks, the third type of business model, this is something that we saw, despite being very prevalent outside of the healthcare world, was very underutilized in healthcare. So these are the type of businesses where users are transacting information or items of value with one another. So in telecommunications, where all the users are exchanging data with each other, or in insurance, where we collectively pool our premiums and we take claims out of it, or banking or eBay are familiar examples as well. It was hard to think of where this business model was really being applied, but we realized that, you know, going back to the days of Alcoholics Anonymous and Weight Watchers, where we're trying to assemble users to share information and advice with each other, well, that was really one implementation that we saw. And the real benefit, though, was not the fact that, you know, trying to figure out what diseases they could apply to, but understanding the fact that this business model allowed users to get information and advice at a very low cost with a business model that was essentially available 24 hours a day. In AA, people were calling their peers when their doctors were asleep. And so, you know, these types of networks, whether it's eBay or telecommunications, essentially are paid for on a fee-for-membership or fee-for-transaction basis. And it is actually a perfect business model for chronic conditions and lifelong behavioral business models that require very high touch and frequent touch that a doctor's office or a hospital is simply not equipped for. You know, I remember back to the days when I was practicing, if I had a patient with a, you know, that was difficult to treat and required a lot of hand-holding, all I could offer was really a visit every 3 months instead of every 6 months. And if I did that for every patient that required that level of interaction and intervention, I'm basically adding to that cost of the system of trying to manage behavioral problems or chronic conditions in this manner. It is simply a business model that's not well suited for managing those problems that exist 24/7. Instead, it requires some of these facilitated networks to arise. And so what we're eventually advocating is this explosion of new business models that come out of the general hospital that dominates the centralized system that I described early on. And ultimately, to utilize the enabling technologies, things like telecommunications and the new precision diagnostics that allow us to diagnose the root cause of disease, better decision-making tools that not only allow doctors to look up what should be done, but allow patients. ultimately, these tools are what's going to enable a lot of new business models to arise that are much more focused, much more efficient in solving problems that hospitals and doctors' offices simply are not equipped to do. They can be available 24/7. They can be low cost enough that they can create a lot of frequent touch points. They are incented to keep you out of the hospital and keep you healthy. These things do not exist under the current acute sick care system. And I'm going to skip these examples just for time. But basically, just to finish with this idea that if the goal is to create new disruptive business models, I described early on, it's very difficult when you're an existing player to come up with models that disrupt your existing successful business model. In fact, as I said in other industries, if I were to bet on who's going to introduce a disruptive business play, I would almost never bet on an existing incumbent. So can you expect hospitals or doctors' offices or pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies to really be the leaders that take us in this direction? Well, there is hope. The reason why I spend so much time teaching people about disruptive innovation is that once you understand these lessons, you can begin to do some of the things necessary to disrupt your existing business model. Yes, it does require some counterintuitive moves, but to ensure the long-term survival of your company or your business model, it is the only way forward. So the one company I like to describe, and we'll return to the computing industry to show you this example. The one company that's survived not just one disruption, but multiple waves of disruption is IBM. IBM actually did start out as a mainframe computer company, eventually became a mini computer company, later a PC company, and is now not even really making hardware, or at least not focused on that area, and has moved into services. And so how has IBM done it? It's essentially this recognition that there needed to be a new business model, and therefore, in order to allow that business model to blossom, they needed to give it autonomy, to operate as an independent business unit that was not, in fact, just allowed to grow, but allowed to compete against the parent and cannibalize sales. Because if it grew and continued to grow, it would become the next generation of IBM. And so when IBM was a mainframe computer company, and it saw mini computers starting to bubble up, it didn't say, boy, how do we kill off the mini computers? Instead, it said, you know what? We're not sure, but if mini computers really are the wave of the future, let's set up a new business in Rochester and basically tell them, your job is to figure out how to build mini computers and make money off it. And if you start to cannibalize sales of the mainframe computers and you start to kill off the parent business, well, we're just going to slap the new IBM label on you. And likewise, when the PC first started bubbling up, they set up a new business in Florida and said that your job is to figure out a way to make money off of PCs, and you have an unfettered charter to kill off the parent business. So it's this almost counterintuitive move that is required in order to allow disruptive innovations to thrive within your organization. And so I think it's important that part of the core theme of this conference and at this innovation center is leadership. Because these disruptions can only happen, I think, successfully when it's shepherded through by leaders that really understand the innovation process and understand what kinds of innovations are necessary to deliver greater affordability and convenience in healthcare. Otherwise, I think we're always going to be trapped in the discussion of how do we build more general hospitals, or how do we build more mainframe computers so that everybody can have access to expensive computing or expensive healthcare. It's just not a viable solution forward. So I'd encourage you to take some of these ideas about disruptive innovation and remember this diagram of always trying to push for this decentralized world where we're trying to deliver more care in the home, allowing patients greater control, and trying to figure out what technologies it's going to take to empower them so that this can happen. Thanks very much.